All right. So obviously so far we've chatted quite a bit about, or I know my breakout session was starting to chat about different needs during the NSO process. And so we figured today during the workshop, we would really focus on the 3 to 7 days of opening. And that's feels like kind of the generic timeline that we hear is pretty common of like what training looks like on the ground with your teams during you know, the NSO process. For me, though, it's always helpful to start macro of what is our NSO game plan, as Sarah likes to call it. So this is sort of the basics of like a design instructional design document of who's the audience for your game plan, what are the real training goals that we're going for with our game plan, what are our identified training gaps, and you'll see I kind of broke them down into 3 different gaps that I like to really think about, and then what are the training methods for that. So big picture, who's our audience during an NSO game plan? And if you feel more comfortable putting in the chat, or if you feel more comfortable, speaking out loud, let me know. Mm-hmm. Yep, especially during NSO. Al, you're just you don't know where they're coming from, their backgrounds, things like that. I also think a really big thing to remember about your audience during the NSO is every single person is new. No one knows your brand yet. So that's to me, I think one of the defining aspects of the audience during an NSO. Anyone else have any? I'll write some in here. So
existing market. So it's kind of nice to have that balance of having between a lot of people, and depends on how far we go from our core starting point, which is we consider Minneapolis. We have a kind of cool balance of people who have never been there before, or people who maybe moved away a little farther out of the city into the suburbs, and they're excited that we're in there too. So we got kind of a lucky in that sense.
do you think that kind of made things a little bit easier for you then during any NSOs is having the individuals, that are from another existing store come in to support the NSO process?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And a lot of times it's an exciting piece. A lot of our crew members want to do it. And so they'll make a longer drive or something. And so, for example, our newest location in a southern suburb of Minneapolis, we have one of our managers that she brought over. She worked with us for 11 years now. And so we kind of have that kind of, foundation.
Sorry, I'm also just pulling from the chat here as well. So veterans versus new hires, definitely just in terms of time within the industry. Then kind of moving into goals. So kind of your goals for an NSO. When you all think big picture during that NSO, what are the training goals that you set out for your teams? Okay, training checklists. So checklist completion rates. I see a lot about culture, full menu knowledge. I would add that with my brand consistency, right? Menu knowledge. So with the culture piece, which I think we say a lot as trainers, but then sometimes what we do in terms of training can fight against that. So when you talk about culture gaps, like identified training gaps that you're trying to close the gap during, right? Training at the end of the day is where are you starting? Where are you trying to go? And then training is closing the gap between that, as you all know. That's where the culture gaps come into play. I've worked for multiple different restaurant groups, and yeah, we all had service. We served food in really great settings, but like the priorities of that business were different. And I had to learn those as a general manager, as a regional manager. That's really where I think culture gaps become really important, of identifying like, what are my priorities as a business, right? What do I want my team to know? Speed is more important than X. Accuracy is more important than Y. Friendliness is more importantly than Z, more important than Z. I know we want everything to be a priority, but that's just not how it works. That's not the reality of the situation. So helping your teams with those culture gaps, I think, are really important. And I'm sorry, I have not been monitoring the chat, but I see people making great comments in here. What are some of the skill and knowledge gaps that you're trying to overcome to get to our kind of stated training goals from earlier?
So with Burton's, we put a big focus on allergies, allergy awareness, allergy treatment, communication with the kitchen on allergies, and a lot of the safety and standards through there. So that's something that we put a lot of time and effort in, that we don't see people coming in the door with that skill set, and that we have to really focus on and put a lot of time and attention into.
Definitely. And it's probably something that your customers have, again, come to realize that Burton's really prioritizes. Craft cocktails. I would put that both in a skill and a knowledge gap, right? It's a knowledge gap of what is a craft cocktail, and then a skill gap of how to make it. Amazing. And then, specifically with an NSO, as you all are familiar with, the training methods become incredibly important. So typically, for regular new hire onboarding, you don't have a cohort of individuals that are coming on board all at once. So with training methods, we lean more into like classroom style training, group experiential training sessions. Keith, I think you had mentioned the server on server training, where it's like I'm serving a table here, getting feedback from the other servers, and then they'll serve me back. I think you had mentioned that when you were talking about just preparing a space before your guests even come into play. So what are some training methods that you all use specifically for NSOs that you don't always bring into your typical new hire training? Okay, so heavy role playing. Problem solving in advance. Oh, got it. So, Donata, what you mean by that is you, to you, that problem solving aspect is an advanced skill that you would be shooting for with your teams? And I'll add some of the ones that I added. So like classroom style. Mock training sessions, yep. Friends and family. Group activities. So again, to that culture building piece that was brought about earlier, Shane.
I think kind of
and
teamwork,
this is where
building too out of that. Like we incorporated something in our last one, which is like a skills relay race, where you break them all into a group, and each person in the group has to practice a skill and then come back and they compete against each other. And you can't do that when you have one new trainer, one new trainee. But when you have a whole group of them in the new store, you can do more fun stuff like that and kind of get them excited and, like I said, work on building that teamwork and camaraderie too.
Yes, amazing. But I think the real goal of kind of talking through these training methods is just like Sarah showed earlier of the show tell kind of do review aspect that we really do believe here at Opus. Different aspects of these will hit upon that, and you can build off of them over your days of training. So like classroom training, yes, you do just need some benchmark understanding of what the brand is about and what it is that we're about to do. And like, here's some pre-reading that you have to do, whatever it might be. So that's really like your day ones. And then your role playing comes in as you continue down through your game plan at like day 2 and day 3 of training. And then those teamwork building exercises are kind of like, to me, put throughout each day to continue to build that camaraderie within your group. But this is where the training methods, I think, of an NSO, as Dee Dee was mentioning right as we were coming out of the breakout sessions, are really important. Check-ins, we really do believe in them as a tool to use with Opus, but they might not serve your particular business during an NSO. So how can you repurpose that same idea of shoulder-to-shoulder training and just continue to make sure that your teams have ways to like build accountability and just work together to again, hit these identified training gaps that you have, get really specific with those during the NSOs, and then apply the right training methods.
Something also I'm noticing a pattern in the chat is that most of the gaps come in with culture. You're mixing a lot of groups of people together because knowledge gaps and skill gaps can kind of be resolved over time and don't necessarily not blockers to like opening on day one, but it's nailing the culture and making sure that you're actually bringing together a team is probably the most important part.
Yeah. With those identified training gaps, with your skill gaps, it's how do you do something? With your knowledge gap, it's really what do you do? And your culture gap at the end of the day is why do you do something? And it is going to be specific to each of your individual brands. And that's, the secret sauce, as you guys know. I'm going to share my screen and kind of bring you into Big Chicken's bring you into Big Chicken's dashboard for a quick second, just to show you the way that they've laid out their game plan as they, as we've been calling it, and as they like to call it as well. Sarah, I know you helped them adapt it for this as one of our demos. Will you just kind of do a quick brief walkthrough here?
Yeah, actually, I cannot take credit for this. It was one of our iconic, legendary customer success managers, Erin, who worked with, I believe, Trisha and Dee Dee. This is also your brand, so jump on in. Worked together with Trisha because I think the problem that they were facing was they were trying to put all of the new hire training into the NSO timeline. And what they were finding is that it was just too much to work with. And people were getting bogged down in Opus and they weren't having enough time to really invest in the hands-on portion. So what we did was really prioritize the courses in the new hire modules that made sense for each day of just one NSO module. So it's like, okay, instead of having them go through all of the different like new hire modules, the role-based training modules during the timeline, let's create like a digestible NSO module that is applicable to everybody that is part of the new hire, the NSO process, or is training between the on that week, and break it out into sections day by day so that they're really getting just the most important bits. They're gonna get the rest of their role-based training, but this is the thing. These are the things that they need to focus on. And then something that I really love that they did was they included a literal game plan, like a worksheet. So when you're herding sheep, and Mel, this is also on your butterboard so that we can zoom in and see how they actually break it up of like, these are the parts you're doing on Opus, these are the parts that we're doing hands-on. So they have their own agenda and they have that kind of accountability. So they have not accountability, they have visibility into what they're going to be working on next. And this is not necessarily rare. I think Kim at Hop.e, you guys take a similar approach in terms of breaking down lessons in Opus with also like the hands-on part. Something that Trisha really touched on in her clip at the beginning was we really need to make sure that the culture of Big Chicken is alive and well, because we're focusing so much on culture, brand, service, and also the friends and family event, which is kind of like their big party and how they bring everyone together.
Yep. And I think the big thing that I really like when I look at the sections that Big Chicken's done is they're, and Dee Dee, correct me if I'm wrong, it does look like some of the content that you all created for your new hire training is being repurposed specifically for an NSO. And there's a flexibility about the structure. So it's like, yes, on day one, we want to hit each of these individual sections, but the needs of the business that day are going to inform what section is going to be, brought up in that moment. Or maybe it's, you have a trainer that's leading an individual section area. And then that's informing kind of like how you're able to jump around within a module.
Yeah. And actually, I just that during their new restaurant openings, they're getting exactly the same thing a new hires going to get. We just structured it differently. So we have the front of the house trainer that takes the front of the house people, and the back of the house trainer takes the back of the house. They don't get anything different. We just do it in a more condensed period of time.
Yep, that makes sense.
Kathleen has a great question on how do they manage the auto assignment for NRO team members versus the non-NRO. So going back to the idea of cohorts, not everybody is necessarily new to the brand. So how are you like segmenting and tailoring that training? For Big Chicken specifically, I had not looked into like the actual assignment, but best practices and things that I've seen is paths by role. So in Opus, you can actually create a path or like a sequence of modules and actually filter them by role. So something that we see, and I can go ahead and share my screen if the visual is pretty nice, is oh, it's not letting me share my screen.
Your screen? Oh, we can see.
You can?
Yep,
your
office hours, Opus dash.
Can you see the dashboard?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, cool. It wasn't awesome. So in Opus, you can create paths. So paths are a really great way to kind of sequence module assignments or like automate the training that they should receive next based on their roles. Paths can be pretty crazy. I can just quickly show a path that we worked on recently with Craveworthy brands because they have to build this out across so many different brands. So everybody gets the Opus 101 training for modules, then it splits off by brand so that they get the right welcome module. And then it goes back into food safety, and then everybody goes into their specific role base. So in terms of automating the assignment, there are ways to achieve that in Opus. Another hack that I have seen rarely, but I think if you do it correctly, you can use roles and create a role for cohorts. So just create since users in Opus can have multiple roles, if you create a role for like NRO or newbies, basically, I think is the one that I've seen the most, you can assign that to a user so that they can get trainings that are just intended for newbies. So there are kind of ways to hack it. It just depends on like what Melanie kind of shared at the beginning of what gaps are you trying to fill, and like not necessarily what training content needs to fill that gap, but what method, like what activity actually needs to take place. Is it some role playing? Could that be done with a check-in? Is that something that they need like one-on-one time with their manager? Or is it like a simple flashcard, or is it maybe like a game or a sprint relay race? The benefit of an NSO, like Melanie said, is that you're working together as like one team and you have the benefit of having like a whole